Wolfpack, what's going on? It's your boy, the Wolf of Roto Street, RotoStreetJournal.com. We breed and feed you fantasy wolves, and we are thrilled to welcome on for the first time Mr. Kevin Fishbain, who covers the Bears over at The Athletic. Kevin's previously covered the Bears beat for the Northwest Herald, Daily Chronicle, and Pro Football Weekly. We're so pumped to have you, Kev. Thank you so much for joining today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And the Bears are definitely going to be one of the more intriguing teams in fantasy all this year, especially depending what happens at quarterback. So let's just dive right in and start there at the top. With head coach Matt Nagy insisting over and over, Andy Dalton's going to be getting that starting nod as the season kicks off. My first question would be just, is there any possibility that this changes depending on what happens with the Titans this preseason game? I know Fields is starting. Is there any chance that he could change his mind before the season starts?
Well, Matt Nagy is nothing if not stubborn. I think fantasy football owners certainly know that by watching the way he handled his running backs for a long time. I look, if Justin Fields completes every pass and throws 4 touchdowns, we can have the conversation for sure. But Matt Nagy, they've been steadfast all along. It's going to be Andy Dalton week 1. So, the only, I don't even want to call it surprise, maybe the only little bit of news was that Dalton wasn't going to play at all on Saturday, and you were going to get Justin Fields starting. Frankly, I'd almost be like, let Nick Foles just play the whole game, protect Justin Fields. But yeah, it's going to, barring anything crazy, it'll be Andy Dalton on Sunday Night Football in week 1.
It's unfortunate for fantasy fans because we've already seen Dalton. It's tried and true. Nothing fantasy good, no goodness there in that sense. So, in the next question might be then, what's kind of your prediction for how long Andy Dalton's going to last under center there?
I think you take a look at the first 3-4 games, right? That's probably a big, fork in the road. Yeah, if they're 1-2, 0-3, 1-3, 0-4, things like that. I think then you would look to see if they'd make that change early. If he gets through that first month, okay. And look, they've got, Cincinnati and Detroit at home. So it's certainly possible to win both those games. At Cleveland, not really sure what to expect from the Browns this year. I think that Rams game in week 1 is going to be tough. But if they're 2-2, I think they probably all right, let's ride it out. Then they're 4-4, then they're 5-4. We're still doing okay. I could see so that's why I kind of look at week 3, week 4, week 5 being the key part. And then if nothing changes, then you got to look all the way to the bye week. And their bye is pretty late this season, I believe. So you're talking mid-November. Then if they're under 500, maybe at that point they make the change. So I would say those are kind of the two big kind of spots to circle on your calendar for a potential change, because the problem is as much as this staff wants to be patient, they also need to win. So they can't sit around if they're 1-2, 1-3, and they know they've got this guy in Justin Fields just ready to go. I just don't know how long they can sit and wait. But if they're just 500 for a while, listen, the Bears have been perfectly content with that the past couple of years. So maybe they'd be okay. I'll say this. I think here's what I think is the actual ideal scenario for the people who run the Bears. I think they would love it if they went 10-7 and Andy Dalton started the whole season.
Oh.
Right? Yeah. I think if they they're thinking if we could win 10 games with Andy Dalton, make the playoffs, that's a successful season. And that whole time, Justin Fields is learning and he's practicing, and we know what he's doing on the other practice field. Yeah. So I could that's what they want. They want the 2017 Chiefs, and then they move on to Justin Fields next year. 2017 Chiefs, a lot more talented than the 2021 Bears. Yeah. So, but just for everybody who's watching and listening, kind of gets where they're coming from. That's what they want to happen. I just think that's incredibly unlikely.
I hate to say I'm rooting against the Bears then, but as a fantasy fan, I think we all would much rather see Justin Fields under center, and hopefully that scenario does not play out, because I've been definitely recommending Justin Fields, even though he's a bench stash, towards your later rounds as a guy that, if and when he gets on the field, certainly could do some damage. I guess that's my next question would be, what can we expect? Let's say he does take over. My ideal scenario is that kind of first one you said, they go 1-3, and we already have him on the field in 4 weeks. Let's say that happens. What are you seeing out of Justin Fields so far in practice, in the preseason? What do you think we could expect from him if and when he does get out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at recent rookie quarterbacks, especially the ones that have a running threat, and maybe the best ones, like you can look at those stats as a good comp. Like I think Justin Herbert is certainly like top of that, marker, and obviously not known for his running, but in terms of numbers, like he was one of the best rookie quarterbacks we've seen. Like I don't know if you can put him up there because he just doesn't have the horses around him. And then the offensive line question marks, but he's got that running element. Like Justin Fields could run for 6-7 touchdowns. And like we know in fantasy football, like that's what separates quarterbacks, the ones that can run. And he's going to be, that guy, just because it's a bad offensive line and mediocre offense, that guy could scramble for 50, 60 yards every game. So he's been really good in camp. He's had a pretty good preseason, some ups and downs, but like he's one of those guys who once he gets in, I could see him being like, he'll have a couple games where you're like, oh my God, fantasy weapon. And then a couple games like, oh, he's a rookie, right? Yeah. Like you're going to remember, okay, he needs time. And then if things go well by 2022, 2023, you're talking about a guy who's like a top 10 fantasy quarterback and maybe even top 5 when you consider the fact that he's going to run for 5-10 touchdowns a season. So I do think he'd be extremely intriguing, but I also want to caution everybody that like, we just don't like even the best quarterbacks, like the rookie years just aren't very good. Again, Herbert is the exceptional rule. You'll go back to Russell Wilson in 2012. You look at what RG3 did, certainly Andrew Luck. But it's just hard, especially with this team, to expect a ton of consistency from him.
That's a really good point there, and something I might need to weigh in, that the consistency might not be what I think. I just think, in preseason DFS, as the gambling addict I am, I was playing some daily fantasy, and I had Fields in one day, and the first half, I remember it was against Miami. Didn't do so much. Came in for another quarter and had like only 1 fantasy point going into there. Had like 18 within the next drive because of the leg points, because of just like the big arm. So even if it doesn't look pretty at all times, it just showed what kind of explosive upside he had. So that's kind of what sold me right there. We will see. Hopefully it's sooner than later that we're seeing him, but there is some caution that the Bears would like to have him on the bench all year. That makes him a risk where he's kind of going right now, round 11 and 12. So that's good to note. And WOLFPACK, I see a few of your questions coming in. I really, really appreciate that. Just remember, I'll get to all of those at the end once we hang up here with Kevin. And just a reminder, all your thumbs up, likes, tweets, reshares always helps get us out to more people, and it means the world to help grow the WOLFPACK. Thank you, guys. Allen Robinson's the next guy I want to turn to. So regardless of who's under center, you can just guarantee they're going to be dialing up number 12 a lot. Despite subpar QB play, he's been the wide receiver 9, wide receiver 8 in fantasy. No small part to the fact he saw 154 and 151 targets across his 2 seasons with the Bears. In fact, he has seen at least 150 targets every season he's played a full year, regardless of where he's at, regardless of where his QB is. And he's been a top 10 quarterback in all of those seasons. Top 10 receiver in all of those. So the guy is clearly a baller. Now, do you think we should just expect more of the same this year? Could he even improve, whether it's Dalton or Fields? What are your expectations for Robinson this season?
Well, if you think Fields is going to be this massive upgrade, I think everybody around him benefits, and that would include Allen Robinson. And you think about the downfield passing element. I know you don't think of Robinson like as a burner necessarily, but in terms of he put up, even last year with Mitch Trubisky, Nick Foles, he had more 20-yard catches than any Bear has had in over 20 years. So you think about what he could do with Fields. But even with Andy Dalton, like, let's go through the list, right? Christian Hackenberg, Blake Bortles, Mitch Trubisky, Nick Foles. Okay. Like, you could argue Andy Dalton is the best quarterback he's played with in his career. Like you can make that argument, and you've seen what Robinson's done, as you kind of alluded to, with all those guys. So I think he's going to have another outstanding year. The motivation is obviously there in a contract year, not shy of the frustration that the Bears did not reward him with a long-term contract that he saw fit. Head into another position, possible, could get a second franchise tag, could certainly be the highest paid player in free agency next year, highest paid wide receiver, I should say. So and that's just somebody whose work ethic is off the charts. And like, you see him in practice, you see what he does in the offseason. Like, he's still young. Like, there's just like, it's hard to knock him. Like, the only knock really is that just the offense around him is just going to limit him a little bit. And you think about red zone opportunities, which might not have as many of those as some of the other top 5 wide receivers. But yeah, I think if anything, Robinson could be better with both quarterbacks.
Yeah. And that, I'm 100% agree with you. I think the fact that you said he's still young, like, a lot of people listening, it's easy to forget that he really is only, I believe, 27, 28 right now. which is crazy. Like it feels like he's been around forever, but he really isn't. So he's got plenty more years. He's still right in his prime. I'm fully there with you. I always like to do this with the beat writers when they come on, is ask you what you think of the Vegas lines after they've added him. So his line right now is set at 1090.5 yards and 6.5 TDs. What do you think of that? Do you think over? Do you think under? Is it split on different stats? Like, what are your thoughts on that line?
Ooh, man, I would say if it's over both, I think the Bears would be really happy with that.
Yeah.
I think that the problem, and I remember doing this last year with an over-under somebody gave me with Robinson's touchdowns. I went under, and he ended up being under. And that's just, again, the consequence of this offense. Like, it's just not a good enough offense for him to score 10, 12 touchdowns a season like somebody of his caliber probably should. When they get down to the red zone, I know we're going to get to the tight ends in a minute, but like that's who the quarterback's going to be targeting. And then you think about David Montgomery taking those goal line carries. So I could see him getting, I think 6.5 is perfect for that to where to put that. The receiving yards, I go over on that. I mean, I really think you could, because look, this is a team that could be trailing a lot too this season. Is going to have to be throwing a ton, and he's going to be the guy. So yeah, I would say over on receiving yards. Shoot, that touchdown is tough. Like, I usually go under with him. Again, not a slight on him, but just a slight on the offense around him.
Right. Yeah. And just for context too, he's put up 1147 and 1250 yards. So this is under what he's done in 2 straight years. If he does have the best quarterback of his career, and I agree with you, even if it's Dalton, it's going to be better than what he's dealt with. To me, that's one of the easiest over-under bets. I don't think that's even a question unless he gets hurt somehow. He's going to smash the yardage. The touchdowns does make sense, given that they might not be in the red zone so often. And we're going to talk about the tight ends that might eat there too. But yeah, the yardage, to me, you can do a separate bet on just yards. I think that's his lock of any lines that I've seen with any beat writers I've done this with. Let's move on to the next potential wide receiver in this offense. One of the most popular breakout candidates in fantasy football. I believe you might have even actually labeled him your breakout candidate in a great article by The Athletic. And again, anyone that doesn't subscribe to The Athletic, it's not expensive, and it's the best coverage of all, just NFL, of fantasy. They've got great stuff too. But I love the specific team-by-team coverage. I've been blessed to interview so many of you guys, and there's a reason I keep trying to get The Athletic guys. You guys are awesome, so I can't recommend it highly enough. Check out that article, The Breakout Players. And the guy you mentioned was Darnell Mooney. So I guess I kind of buried the lead there, but you do like him a lot. He did have some struggles as a rookie. He seemed to always be open, but the ball was never near him. So what do you think on Mooney as a breakout candidate? Why did you pick him in that article? And what have you been seeing in camp so far?
Well, I sure hope I'm not jinxing him. Like I feel like I've talked about him a lot this summer, and the Bears have talked him up this summer. Like, they're really excited about him. I also labeled him as the best player in camp.
Wow.
Like, you could just, like, the thing with him was he opened everyone's eyes week 2. Like, suddenly he was starting and playing a ton of snaps. Like, his run blocking impressed everybody. And like, listen, I know that doesn't matter. You would think that doesn't matter to fantasy, but if your wide receiver can run block, that means he's on the field more often. So to me, like, that's a big deal. And we know he can fly. He's, once Justin Fields comes in, he's going to have a quarterback that can take advantage of that, because the quarterbacks last year, as you talked about, didn't. To me, it's the route running. I think his route running is really improved. Like, watching him in camp, he just looked really smooth. I want to say he set the Bears rookie record in receptions, potentially. It was either receptions or receiving yards last year. So he put up pretty good numbers from relative to the Chicago Bears franchise, which is generally, as Musha Muhammad said years ago, it's where wide receivers go to die. So, it's a low bar in Chicago, but I like Mooney a lot. I think, they're really excited about him. He trained with Allen Robinson this summer. It's like hard to put kind of numbers on him, but I think if you look at what he did last year, like, that's going to go up. Like, you're going to get the second year bounce from that. If the passing game is better, he's going to benefit from that. I just really think the guy, I don't know if he has the qualities of being a true number one, if like they're going to move on from Allen Robinson and put him in that category. But I do think this is somebody that has 1,000 yard potential for sure.
Wow. And that's huge. And given that number, 1,000 yard potential, I wonder which way you're going to lean on this. His over-under set at 705 yards. And I wonder where they come up with 705. Such a random number, but 705 and a half and 4 TDs. What do you think of both of those?
Yeah, I go over on the receiving yards. I'm very confident in Mooney this year. Touchdowns is tough. Like, I think he had 4 last year.
Yeah.
I'm going to tease this again. like Cole Kmet could be the ultimate touchdown vulture for this team. And I just don't know how that's going to impact the wide receiver. So I'm not like, that's low, like, because that's what he got last year. So I think you could be comfortable betting the over on that. But I do think this is somebody like 800, 900 yards is definitely in play for him.
Absolutely. And just to put the stats to what we were saying, what we saw on 22 deep targets, 15 of them were deemed uncatchable last year. That was 70%, 17% completion rate on those deep throws was sixth worst. And I don't think it was his fault. He was often wide open and the ball would just sail too far, too low. It just was never where it needed to be. And with Fields coming in 60% accuracy on those deep throws, according to PFF in college, could be great. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be a big breakout year, round 10 or so price. I've been gobbling them up everywhere I can in fantasy for sure. Well, we've talked a lot about those two receivers, and that might be just the focus of it. Is there any other Bears receivers that's worth mentioning, or should we go straight to the tight ends, do you think?
Well, I think that's why you can feel comfortable about Robinson and Mooney. There's nobody else you can really like if you've been reading coverage from Bears camp, you've seen a lot of good things about Marquise Goodwin. Marquise Goodwin was signed for the veteran minimum. Like you've seen a lot of nice things about Damier Byrd, signed for the veteran minimum. Like there's a reason these guys were available. Like they bring speed. They're going to have those games where like they have 3 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown and you get all excited. And the next week they have 2 catches for 14 yards. Like, it's just, I don't think you can rely on either of those from a fantasy perspective, which is why I just imagine Robinson and Mooney are going to get just a lion's share of targets and catches and yards.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I took a sip of water out of the wrong pipe. My apologies there. But I fully agree. I think it's definitely those two atop the target totem pole, which is why in fantasy we always look for those concentrated attacks. And I think this one is very concentrated with those two. But you have already teased this guy a lot. So why don't we go on in there with Cole Kmet? I thought he flashed a lot of upside, certainly one of the highest ranked tight ends coming in the last class. And it is a tough position to transition to as a rookie. Historically, we've seen that, but he still showed some good stuff, especially towards the end of the year. At the same time, Jimmy Graham still remains with the team, which could cap his ceiling. What are your thoughts on this situation? Do you think Cole Kmet could break out this year, even with Graham around? And what are your kind of expectations for him?
Yeah, I think Kmet is like kind of the ultimate sleeper for this team because, like if you're in a fantasy draft with Chicago people, he's going to be overdrafted. If you're in a draft with like nobody from Chicago, I think he's going to be underdrafted. So like you got to find that sweet middle spot for him because like there's a lot of excitement here about him. He's a local guy. He, extremely athletic, but just not utilized properly last year. And it took a long time for him to get into the offense. And the offense was kind of a mess when he first got on the field. But they're very excited about him, similar to Darnell Mooney. You get that second-year bump in all of his stats. And he didn't have 300 yards receiving last year. Right. So, like, I think the guy can certainly double what he did last year. And, this is somebody who was their top pick in the 2020 draft. They feel really good about him. And going back to that, not having a really solid number 3 receiver, like, Kmet, that's where he steps in. The Jimmy Graham thing's interesting. I don't think anything ticked off Bears fans more that the Bears decided to keep Jimmy Graham and cut Kyle Fuller and cut Charles Leno when Graham counts $7 million against the cap. I get it. I really do. I was surprised by it. The thing about Jimmy Graham is he was a touchdown monster last year. Right. And like if they're just going to give him 20 snaps a game, just limiting it to third downs and red zone, and he can still win those one-on-one balls with a linebacker or a safety. Like, why not? I kind of understand it. So I think that he could vulture some touchdowns from Kmet for sure. Like Kmet could be one of those guys who gets up to 600 yards receiving, 650 yards receiving, but only like 3 touchdowns. You're thinking for a tight end, like that's tough. Like I could see like that, like him being a disappointment in some ways from that regard because of Jimmy Graham. And Jimmy Graham could have 380 yards and 6 touchdowns, like that's just the way that they're going to go. But I do think that they have really, really high hopes and big plans for what Kmet could do in this offense. Like Travis Kelce is an unfair comparison, but like that's the guy that Matt Nagy is thinking about. That's the guy that was the engine that makes that Chiefs offense go. And you think about the similarities in terms of their build and what they can do, Kmet could do some of the things Kelce can do, just athletically speaking. It's just how can he work in the offense? How can he, he's not anywhere near the experience level of Kelce and the savvy of Kelce and all those things. But just to give you an idea of like how the Bears could theoretically feature him in the offense, like that's the type of level they want to get to one day. It's not going to be this year, probably might not be next year, but like one day they would, like, their ideal is that Kmet becomes that kind of guy. So like that's the type of player that we're talking about here. So they're going to be getting him a lot of targets.
Very intriguing for sure. Even in like redraft, it sounds like there's certainly a role yardage wise, potentially touchdown wise, depending on Jimmy Graham's usage down there. But certainly in dynasty leagues, it sounds like this guy has a really good long tail to him, and he's going dirt cheap in dynasty leagues right now. So if there is a Travis Kelce potential ceiling, I mean, certainly that's like the highest possible par you could ever hit, but anything even 3/4 of Travis Kelce down the line, I think fantasy owners would be ecstatic with. So that's something for you guys listening in dynasty leagues. Like Cole Kmet, sometimes probably not out there in a ton of waiver wires dynasty wise, but last round pick or so, he's going late. I think I snagged him in mine actually, so I'm pretty pumped to hear that for sure. Very intriguing. Is there a world that like Jimmy Graham just is non-existent and Kmet just kind of eats in the red zone too? Like he is pretty big, right?
Oh, for sure. And like if you look at their snap counts last year, it was like Graham was up here for those watching and Kmet was down here, and then eventually they kind of came and met, and then Kmet passed him. Like, so, that gave you a sense of like Kmet's going to be the guy who's probably out there a ton and Jimmy Graham not as much. So yeah, I mean, you could see Kmet being, I mean, this is a team that for years now has talked about utilizing 12 personnel more and having 2 tight ends in the field. And because what we just talked about, like the not having that really reliable number 3 receiver and feeling really good about Kmet, like maybe this is the year they finally do it and take advantage of those 2 guys. So yeah, I could certainly see Kmet like having that potential. I just caution because like Graham's still here for a reason. Yeah. Like they're paying him a lot of money. They're going to expect him to eat when they get near the goal line. But as you said, like I think Kmet from a long-term view has a lot of potential. Like I'm really interested to see what he does this year because I'm confident they're going to target him a lot, or at least try to get him involved a lot. I just don't know what that looks like yet.
Very intriguing indeed. Well, we've covered the pass game, pretty much anyone worth noting in the Bears pass game. So why don't we turn our attention to the run game? And David Montgomery, what a finish this guy had from week 12 on. This kind of seemed like a light went on. I don't know what happened, and maybe you could give us some more insight. But this was just the guy. He ended up being the number 1 running back for those final 5 weeks. He didn't score any less than 20 fantasy points in any of those games. And despite this torrid finish, it seems like fantasy owners might be a little bit skeptical because he's still falling to about round 3, sometimes even 4 in fantasy drafts. So I just kind of want to pick your brain. Like, do you think there's any chance he picks up where he left off? What kind of led to that breakout? Or are fantasy owners right to expect this regression here?
Well, I think the problem for David Montgomery is look what happened in the final game of the season in the playoff game. Like against good defenses, like they totally bottled him up. And if you look at that production that he had in that stretch, it was against some really bad defenses.
True.
But the offensive line came together then. And I think from a fitness standpoint, Montgomery looks great. Like he looks a little quicker. That they're being really careful with him. So you always worry with these guys, with these running backs about the injury risk, but like he's somebody who carried the ball a ton at Iowa State. He's pretty durable. He proved last year that he's a weapon in the passing game. And I think from a fantasy standpoint, that's huge. Yeah. And with Tariq Cohen still out, like that's Montgomery a lot rely on him last year. And I think this is why you can be optimistic about Montgomery is they didn't try anybody else, right? When Cohen went out, it was just the David Montgomery show, and he got a ton of snaps, a ton of targets, and they saw what he was able to do. So I think from what like his own individual abilities, I think he's just fine. I think he's going to be he's a good running back, like he's an above average running back in this league. My worry with him is just this offense has struggled to have a consistent running game since Matt Nagy got here. And whether it's the scheme, the line, the passing game that doesn't really scare a whole lot of defenses, whatever it is, good defenses have just shut them down. And so you get the games where Montgomery gets like 13 carries for 25 yards. And that just kills you as a fantasy owner. So I understand kind of the skepticism, but I also, the flip side is like, he's a really good player and he's a dual threat running back and he's an important part of this offense. Like if you think about guys you can depend on, I think he's probably number 2 behind Allen Robinson. But just because of obviously the position, from a fantasy perspective, but just like you think about his production and his durability last year. So, it's an interesting one because like they would love it if he's another 1,000-yard rusher, but I definitely do understand why people will be a little nervous because this running game just has had moments of just doing nothing, and it hasn't been his fault, but it's just something to to kind of be aware of.
Yeah, certainly a couple years ago too. I was big on him as a rookie. He came in, it seemed just never really clicked, and it finally seemed to hit there last year. One person brought up when I was having this talk that Bill Lazor was the one that took over play calling, and I don't know if that had any impact, but they've already said Nagy's going to take that back over. And I don't know if Lazor was just like, we're going to feed this guy and keep it consistent, whereas Nagy might get a little cuter with his running backs. Maybe that's something. I don't know. Do you think there's any validity to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, when Lazor took over, a lot of things came together, and the offense kind of switched a bit. And we saw what happened. Mitch Trubisky played well. Like saw kind of the moving the pocket and under center and handing the ball off a lot. But this is gonna be a little bit more like that West Coast offense that we're used to. Matt Nagy's kind of offense because they believe that Andy Dalton can run it. But like there's gonna be different flavors in there from Bill Lazor. I mean, Lazor's still the offensive coordinator. He and Juan Castillo are still kind of in charge of the run game. So, I think that when I think about like, okay, what am I most interested to see in terms of what this offense looks like? I would say how they utilize David Montgomery and what the run game can produce is very high on that list.
Very intriguing indeed. Well, Vegas has him set for it's essentially, is he going to have 1,000-yard season or not? 1,000.5 yards, 7.5 TDs. What are your thoughts on that line?
Well, I can't put too many people over 1,000 yards. It is the Bears.
I'm with you though. I kept thinking like these seem really low, especially with 17 games this year. I don't know. I'm.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, with 17 games, I mean, if he doesn't get hurt, yeah, I think Montgomery is going to have over 1,000 yards. Like they just don't. They don't really have anybody else they're going to hand it to.
Right.
So like, Damian Williams has looked okay in training camp, and comes over from the Chiefs, knows the offense, was the kind of the playoff hero a couple of years ago. Certainly intriguing and adds some pass catching elements. But you're not giving him more than 5 carries a game. Montgomery's still going to get 12 to 15, if not more, carries every game. Excuse me. So yeah, I think over for the yardage for sure.
Yeah, especially when I think Nagy had a quote earlier this offseason where he said, like, if we can get him 20 plus carries a game, that's a good thing. So who knows if he actually is a man of his word in that sense, and we'll give him 20 carries a game. But if he does, there's no way he doesn't hammer that over. So I like that over. I love Allen Robinson's over even more. So I'm with you. You mentioned Cohen, and that is a big piece of this because that receiving role was crucial, especially for fantasy stats. It was huge that David Montgomery took that on and shouldered it. This is the last player I wanted to cover with you. It's a mystery right now without a timetable to return. Is there any insight out there? Do you have any guesses as to when we might be able to expect him? And when we do you think he'll go right back into that role of the clear-cut guy, or do you think Montgomery showed enough?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew. I wish I had information on Tariq Cohen. I mean, it's a complete mystery, and that's not a good thing, right? Like that's not ideal. That we just don't know. I mean, we did our 53-man roster projection this week, and we didn't put him on the roster. Like we expect him at this point to start the season on PUP, which means he's missing the first 6 games of the season. Now, if they think him back in September, maybe he does make the roster, and then maybe we start seeing him working his way back. But just somebody like him, the way he works in the open field, the plant and go, the shiftiness, you just don't know what a guy is going to do after a torn ACL like that, like the way he runs. So there's just so much unknown. So even when he comes back, can you really be that confident in what he's going to do? It's going to take him some time to get acclimated, to be comfortable getting hit again. I know we've seen that you can be running back and tear your ACL and come back and be fine. And maybe he will be fine, but there's way too much unknown there with him. I mean, I could tell you that like they love the guy and his work ethic is extremely high. And in 2018, he was such a weapon for them as a runner and receiver, and they would love to find a way to get that back. With that injury happening in week 3 last year, they never really had the opportunity to try. So I they would love to figure out a way to make it work again. I just don't know when he's going to be healthy.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we will find out for sure this year. Well, we always like to wrap up with our beat writers here, Kevin, with the no huddle offense. Really quick, 10 rapid fire questions. You down to take that on?
Let's do it.
All righty. Number one is, who's the team's leading rusher and how many yards does he have?
Oh, David Montgomery, and we'll go 1,100.
What about the team's leading receiver in yardage?
A-Rob, and shoot, I mean, that's somebody that could certainly get up to 1,100, maybe, his career year was 1,400. I don't think he's getting that again. But with the 17th game, you can talk 1,150 for somebody like him.
I like it. What do you think is going to be the team's biggest disappointment on offense this year?
I think it's going to be not having any production from that number 3 receiver. Like, I think you could look at guys like Godwin and Bird could have, 300 yards receiving a piece. Like, I just don't know what you can expect from those guys, especially for a full season. And both those guys have a little bit of injury histories as well.
What about the biggest surprise or breakout player this year?
We talked about Darnell Mooney. So I'm obviously high in him. I'll throw this out there as just something different. I'm curious to see again what Damian Williams is, right? Like, if suddenly week 1, he's getting targeted 8 times. Like, and again, we saw what this guy did on the national stage in the playoffs. Like, he's got some ability. So I'm just, I don't know. I don't think it's hard for me to think that he got on a level where he'd be a fantasy starter. But I would just as long as Cohen's out, like, I just would keep an eye on him. And if suddenly it's like, whoa, this guy's got something, or they really like using him in their offense, then maybe he's worth a flyer if you got a deep roster.
What do you consider the Bears' biggest strength as a team?
Biggest strength, defense. I mean, it's still the defense. Defense. It's that front 7. It's that defensive line and the pass rush. From a fantasy perspective, they kind of have let fantasy owners down the last 2 years, which is not taking the ball away, not sacking the quarterback, which you need. But it's still the best part of that team.
And their biggest weakness?
Biggest weakness. I mean, right now, I would say the offensive tackle spot. Like, there is a world in which Jermaine Ifedi picks up where he left off last year at right tackle and shows us that, like, he is a right tackle. Seattle screwed him up, and, like, he's a better player here. And Jason Peters, he's a future Hall of Famer, and suddenly he's playing, not at that level, but playing well enough. Like, that scenario exists. I'm not sure how confident you can be in that scenario. So I would have to say right now, like, that's a huge concern on offense are those offensive tackle spots. I guess Andy Dalton too, right? Like, nobody knows. I mean, like, the guy's actually impressed me a little bit in training camp, not so much the preseason.
Right. Exactly. What do you think the Bears' record is when all is said and done next year?
8-8-1.
Ooh, 8-8-1. And so where do you think that leaves them standing in their division and ultimately in the conference?
Yeah, I think that still could be second. And, I think the Lions are probably destined for 4th. It's going to be jockeying with the Minnesota Vikings behind Aaron Rodgers. Don't know what to expect from the Vikings this year. And look, 8-8 got him in last year to the playoffs with that final seed. So I think they could be in that 7-8-9. I said 8-8-1 is a bit like when they came out of the 17th game, and I've just kind of decided to lean into it for the rest of the offseason. Like, that just would be a very Bears thing to do, was to find a way to not be above 500, to go 8-8-1. So, but I think they're in that 7-9 win range. Like, I just don't think that this roster is bad enough that they're going to be 6-11, 5-12, things like that. I think there's too many good players. And we've seen the last 2 years that even when they've had these crazy losing streaks, they found a way to battle back.
Right. Absolutely. And the last one I have for you, or second to last one, is this Bears team, or not this Bears team, but the Bears in general will win the Super Bowl when blank, blank, blank happens.
When Justin Fields becomes a franchise quarterback. Yeah.
Love it. And my last question is, do you play fantasy football at all yourself?
So it looks like for the first time since I was probably 12, I will not be playing fantasy football. Yeah. Leagues have dissolved, and it's just been a bit of a time suck. However, I'm drafting for my former roommate next week, and I feel like I might get into it and just co-own the team with him. I will say this, just so folks understand, when you're a beat writer, it's really challenging when you have a fantasy team, because I'm in the press box and I'm watching the game, and things are happening, and you're working on other stuff. Do you have a minute for a fun story about this?
Of course, as much time as you want.
All right. So it's 2015, week 16. Bears are in Tampa. It's a nothing season. I mean, the season's done. They're actually winning a game. I'm in the fantasy championship, right? And I'm packing my stuff up to go down to the locker room. It's the last play of the game. Tampa's down by 2 scores, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
So they throw a Hail Mary, and it's right in front of like where my seat is. So, like, I got a great view of this. So I'm just kind of keeping out of the corner of my eye. And Tampa, like, they get it. They catch it for a touchdown. I'm like, oh, like, that's kind of silly. And I'm thinking, all right, what's the point spread? What's the over-under here? Did this matter? You know, and I go down and then I look, and it was Austin Seferian-Jenkins who caught it. And then I go, wait a second. I run back to my computer. The guy I was playing in the fantasy championship had Austin Seferian-Jenkins on his team. And like, I couldn't believe it. Like, that's why fantasy, you know, it's amazing. Obviously, it's a great, I love it, but it's just like so frustrating when something like that happens. And I'm sitting there being like, I have a job to do. I got to go to the locker room. I got to interview players. I got to write stories. And I'm just like livid about the fact that they just gave up his touchdown to Austin Seferian-Jenkins.
Of all people.
Exactly. It meant nothing to the game. Like, how could you not knock that ball down? So like that moment was like a very like wake up call to me where I was like, man, it is kind of tough to like really focus on your fantasy team and not focus on it, because like, you know, you can still operate, but like it's just challenging to balance that while you're actually trying to do your job. So I will say that like I love writing about fantasy. I love talking fantasy with you, and breaking these things down, because it still is football. Like, right? Like everything we talked about is still football. But I will say, like, I won't miss those moments.
The heartbreak.
Like that one when it like happens right in front of me, and like, don't think I wasn't like, when we're like, it's funny because the Bears had this safety who had a really good game, so he was kind of the one getting all the interviews, and I remember being like, yeah, you had a really good game, but you couldn't have knocked down that one pass.
I hate you. You had a great game, but I hate you. Yeah. Oh man, and of all guys too. I mean, that name's gonna make people cringe because he had like 2 or 3 good games in his career, and one of them ended your fantasy season in the championship. That's just. Yep. Oh, that's fantasy for you. I mean, that's what it is. It's so great and then so heartbreaking at the same time. That's it in a nutshell. Oh, man, Kevin. Well, I can understand why you wouldn't want to play the game. But if you have any questions ahead of your draft for your friend, always feel free to hit me up. I'd be more than happy to help you out. This has been a real pleasure. We really thank you for taking your time. Why don't you just remind our listeners where they can find you, connect with you, and all your work that you want to promote?
Yeah, theathletic.com is where you can get all of our Bears content, NFL content. You mentioned we've got a lot of fantasy content as well. And then you can follow me on Twitter at @Fishbain.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Kevin. I really, really appreciate the time. Have a great weekend. And Wolfpack, I'm going to get to your questions now. Thanks again, Kevin, though. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
All righty. Jeremiah, what's going on, man? Great to see you. The original Wolfpack members. That's been like the best part of this week, is a lot of the OG guys I haven't talked to all offseason. They're starting to come out of the weeds here. Good to see you, though, Jeremiah. Notu, now on Twitter again instead of YouTube. I think you threw me off yesterday. What's your thoughts on Lamb over Cooper in a full PPR league? I think you asked me that the other day, or somebody did. I'm with it. I'm with you. I want Lamb over Cooper. All the reports, I said this on the last stream, have been this guy is unstoppable in training camp. That Athletic article I referenced that Kevin wrote, Mooney for his breakout, CeeDee Lamb was the breakout, and the writer acknowledged, like, this guy had a great season. It seems kind of like I'm cheating, but he is that good that I think he's going to go to 1,100, 12 touchdowns, the guy I was predicting. And I'm on page with that. If you watch any Hard Knocks, he's making highlight play after highlight play. They call it the Des days by how good he looks. So I'm going Lamb over Cooper. And I think even in full PPR, like, the thing I like about Lamb is they're moving him all over this year. He's kind of pigeonholed in that slot role last year. The one risk, and I have to say is every time I talk about the Cowboys, is what's going on with Dak's shoulder. All the latest reports are he's spraying it over the yard. It's looking good. Yards over 20-plus passes. He went like 11 for 12 the other day. I feel good about that. I would have felt a whole lot better to see him out there in a game, take a hit, get up. I am a little nervous about that. I bumped Dak down to about QB9. If he plays all year, is healthy, and they have the offense they had last year, then both Lamb and Cooper is the answer. Like, they're both going to smash. Dak's going to be crazy. He was on pace to throw for like almost 6,000 yards in 16 games. It was crazy. I am a little nervous they're going to rein in those pass attempts, but I still think it's going to be mostly to Lamb and Cooper, very concentrated there at the top. I do prefer Lamb either way. What's up, Prebs? Wolf, another day, another stream. That's the game, man. We are in the heart, the prep of the season. I will say next week I am back to school. I'm going to still try to get live every night with the truth and do positional previews. Fingers crossed we'll be able to make that work because I also have my drafts, a lot of drafts coming up next week. We'll be back to school, so lots of planning and things to do when the real world comes to hit me in the face again. But I'm going to do my best. That's kind of why I've jammed so many in these last couple of weeks, because I know the light is the end of the tunnel's near. So we'll see. I'm going to do my best to be live every day. But I knew you guys had your drafts this weekend, so whatever I can answer heading into those drafts, let's get it. Hey, guys, should I trade Julio Jones and Robbie Anderson for Chris Godwin? I have Mike Evans, and I think it will be valuable to get that stack. That's too much. That's too much. I love Julio, and I really like Robbie. Like, Chris Godwin and Julio are kind of neck and neck for me. So then to toss in a really good receiver like Robbie, some nice depth, or a great wide receiver 3, I wouldn't do that, Mr. Trade. I know you, Samuel. You're just itching to make trades left and right all day. Stop that. No need. Stop that. I'm done with the trade, Sam. Enjoy your team. Unless you're getting a clear win, to me, that's not a clear win. I like stacking. That's more so in best ball and things like that, though. You don't have to go crazy with stacks in redraft. You're giving up too much value, in my opinion. I like Mooney in real life more than fantasy this year, says Prebz. Could be. I mean, we know he can lift the lid and bring a lot of value real life to his team. But as Kevin was saying, maybe he has a 1,000-yard season in him. The routes are a lot crisper. He's not a true number one, as Kevin was saying. But ultimately, does he need to be? He's got Allen Robinson on the other side, and the definition of a true number one. So feasting on number 2 corners with more crisp, refined routes is an addition to that deep speed. I'm all about it, Prebz. I'm all about it. Go Pack Go, says PK, talking trash to the beat writer over there. I wish I had pulled that up while he was here. I absolutely love it. Good to see you as well, as always, BK. Sorry I'm a little bit late. I can't forgive you, Mitch, you fucking jerk. No, of course it's all good, Mitch. You're here to every single one of them. It's like you don't have anything to apologize for ever. You're as good of a fan as we could have ever dreamt of. You're the man. My brother's a huge Bear fan and always has been. Hyped for Fields, has the jersey. I'm hyped up too. And as Kevin was saying, he's made all the throws. Like, he's got the athleticism, has his rookie moments. And if and when he takes over, he's expecting a little bit of up and down stuff. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Fields could be the real deal. I thought they got an absolute steal. As a Patriots fan, I was really hoping he'd fall to us. Not mad about getting Mac Jones either. I mean, that guy looks delightful so far. But I really like Fields. I think he's an absolute baller in this league. One of my worst losses literally came on the final play on Monday night. We're sharing our bad fantasy stories. I got some heartbreak I could get into with you guys. And in fact, you guys have probably experienced it with me when I'm on air and 3 bottles of wine and 8 beers deep. And I don't want to go to those dark places right now. We're on a fresh season here. But let's relive yours, Mitch. I don't want to relive mine. Don't make me go back. All right, Mitch, what do we got? One of my worst losses came on the final play on Monday night, a pass to my opponent's tight end, lost by 0.1. Oof. Oh, that is brutal. Just like the final play to a tight end, like, just hideous. To lose by 0.1 is absolutely heartbreaking. What week does Fields take Dalton's job? So Kevin was saying if they go 10-7, he's never taken the job. And that kind of scares me a little bit right now as somebody who's been hyping up Fields. He also did say in the same breath, I don't expect that. I don't think Dalton's good enough to go 10-7. And he said, it could be as early as week 3, week 4, if it's a 1-2, 1-3 start. But he noted they're facing the Bengals. They're facing a couple pretty easy teams in there. So if Dalton's sucking in those easy contests, then he deserves to get benched, and he will. That's my ideal situation. I don't care if the Bears do good or not. Like, love having these great beat writers on to give us their information. I don't want him to win. I want Fields out there. He said it could be as early as like week 3, week 4, but he could also see it being the bye week as another benchmark, which is pretty late. He mentioned this year. I think he said week 10 or so. So you might be waiting on him a while, and that just sucks. Like, to burn a 10th rounder. And I am advocating for it. I love it between him and Lance. Like, I feel like one of those two is going to be a season winner. Maybe them both whenever they take over. It could be a while though. It sounds like. So that's a little nerve-wracking. Thank you, Kevin. And indeed, thank you again, Kevin. You can find him at Fishbain on Twitter. All his stuff at theathletic.com/Chicago. I could not encourage a subscription to The Athletic more. It is not expensive, and it is such high-quality content for sure. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate your compliments of the great show. Is Michael Thomas worth holding on to? If you have him, Jeremiah, I mean, there's no reason to cut him, because it's Michael Thomas, and now that Jameis is the starting quarterback, I do feel better about all passing game weapons, including him and his impending return. But I also am not going out of my way to draft him. if this is like a keeper question, like you got to burn like a second rounder, no way. Like I don't own Michael Thomas in any league so far this offseason, just because it seems to me like it's one of those situations that he's just going to like grow worse and worse as the year goes, Jeremiah. So I don't know. I'm not into that at all. What do you think of this trade in my dynasty league? T. Higgins and Gibson for Lockett, Hunter Henry, Kareem Hunt, 2 firsts and a third. Oh boy. Okay. So let me relook at this. Higgins. So it's tricky for me to evaluate, the 2 firsts and a thirds. Are they 2022 firsts? Are they 2023 firsts? Like those are more valuable. 2023 is apparently this class that's going to be insane down the road. I typically side on if I'm getting the studs, even if I'm giving up more like players, I like that. Gibson could and should be a stud. Higgins, same idea. And, Hunter Henry, nothing for me. It does seem like a lot, though. 2 firsts and a third. Like, a first could be Jonathan Taylor if this was a couple seasons ago. Like, if I don't think that. So 2022 and 2024, you said, Mike, I see your comment just kind of came in. I think it's a lot, but if you are like in that mode of I'm winning now, you got players that can help you do that and have the long tail. I don't know exactly which side you are on in this side. This is one where, though, in a dynasty, I might like the fluidity of the first, the third, plus Lockett, like who's on par with Higgins, even if Higgins' dynasty a little bit higher because he's got a little younger. Gibson's clearly better than Hunt and Henry if you're looking at it just player-wise, but then 2 firsts and a third to get Gibson. I'm still new to Dynasty, so don't like go too crazy on my recommendation here. And that's why I'm doing the league this year, to kind of really give in and feel confident in my recommendations by the end of it. I feel like all those picks and players is a little too much for like a Higgins and a Gibson. I feel like you might have wanted just a little bit more. But I will say I'm not the best Dynasty person here. What's up with all the confusion on Jameis being named the starter? Initially stated and then turned. Oh, is that true? I thought Schefter confirmed this morning. I haven't seen anything new yet, Mitch. So you have to let me know if anything's been flipped since then. But what I read this morning was Jameis is the starter, and I updated my rankings thinking Jameis was the starter. Kamara went up to 4th. If that's not the case, then that's important. So let me know what you saw, Mitch. Got pick 8 Sunday. I got 7, so I like that. Can I get a top 3 picks at 8? And what should I target at the turnaround? Says Tunes. Of course, my man. I have 7, and these are the 3 guys I'm looking for. Zeke, Kelsey, Kamara. Zeke, Kelsey, and Adams. Probably more so Adams than any of those guys. Maybe Zeke at the top. Those are the guys I'm hoping for. Those guys might be gone at 8. So let's say those guys are gone. I think actually one of them is like destined to fall to you, right? Like one of those 3 will have to be there at 8. So you'll be in good shape there. But let's say they're not, and I'm miscalculating. If it's half or standard, I like Chubb a lot. If not, I do like Aaron Jones. I think he's going to get a huge target boost this year. So I might go to one of those running backs if it's not one of those other 3, Adams, Kelsey, or Zeke. Breb's final draft next week. Here we go, baby. It's that time of the year. Do you see why I took Dalton late in the Dynasty League? I was afraid of Fields getting the Mahomes treatment, I guess. But are you really going to start Dalton and feel comfortable about it? Like, he'll get you as many points as a typical, like, RB3. Dalton sucks. So no, Tunes. I don't. 2022 and 2024. Yeah, that's the first you were talking about. You'd be getting Gibbs. I think you were giving up a little too much in that one, Schneider. But, again, if your team's built to sustain, those losses of the future picks, and you're in it to win it mode, like I can see it. But I do like Hunt. I do like Lockett. Like Hunter Henry, useless. But all those picks does get a little bit expensive, in my opinion. Knox, Ebron, got it. Or should I stick with Irv Smith at tight end? Asked Jeremiah. I like Irv Smith over all these guys. Goddard would be my next because I just believe in the talent, but I am worried about this committee situation going there. But of those guys, I like Irv Smith there. Rappaport. Oh, that's the guy that tweeted it out. I'll have to check that out then. Just had pick 8 and Adams and Zeke were still on the board. I took Zeke. Yeah, I typically go running back too. Zeke's looked slimmer, faster. Like I love Zeke. At 7, I'm kind of hoping that's what happens. Staten all points are leading to him being named the starter, but it's not official yet. Okay. I think it's going to happen though, right? Like my favorite beat writer, like of certainly the Saints, and one of my favorite of all time, Nick Underhill, tweeted out today, like there's no way they could go any other direction based on how Jameis is playing, both in camp, in practice, but also in the preseason games. Like he looked really good. And I can't wait to see Jameis again. I'm so excited. So I really hope that's not true. I can DM you. Yeah, sure. Please, Michael. Please do. But I still think you'd probably be giving up too much. If you can whittle that down to like one first and not the other stuff, then I might feel better about it. How early would you draft James Robinson? Mohammed, great to see you. I would say I have him going in round 3 now. I big bump up the big board. I think I have him coming in at like 33-ish. I would go Montgomery and Carson. I prefer Carson than Montgomery. And then Robinson, who I would go over Swift and Dobbins, if that kind of helps place it for you. He's in that 3rd round running back mix, in my opinion. I've seen him fall as far as 4th round, so you can take advantage of that if you'd like. But yeah, that's right around where I'd go. I have no RB3. Akers went down. Yeah, that was painful. He may be the best option at Superflex, and if anything happens to Daniel, I would be screwed. Yeah, okay. You can justify Dalton all you want, Tunes, but I'll never give him a ringing endorsement. That's for damn sure. All right, Mohammed, great to see you too. I really appreciate it. Guys, best of luck this weekend. I think what I'm going to try to do, because I know this is such a draft-heavy weekend, one, I need to get my guide out. I've had pulled all-nighters. I just want it to be worth the money if I'm going to charge people for it. So I want the projections to be great. I want the guide to be great. And you guys know me at this point. I'm a perfectionist that gets it his own way when it comes to that type of shit. So I'm doing my best. It should be out this weekend. But in the off chance it's not, and you don't have my picks, I do want to try to go live and maybe update the big board based on what happens on Friday, what happens on Saturday's contest. I'm going to update them throughout the weekend. I usually do the Monday market check. I'll either do it live and be able to interact with you guys, or at least just be confident knowing I'm going to be updating these rankings as stuff happens in the games, because it is such an important weekend. This makes me laugh. I have you say nibbling people's cheese for the last month. I don't know where it came from or why, but yeah, that's tight ends nibbling each other's cheese. I keep saying it too. This may be a Jarvis Landry. Yeah, your biggest Jarvis Landry fan in the world is Tunenberg. Biggest Andy Dalton fan in the world. I got to make sure the boys know that you absolutely love Andy Dalton. But don't worry, guys. I will be updating those big boards throughout the weekend, and I'll try my best to get live at least once in case you guys have draft day questions, because I love it. I love talking to you guys. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. All of our content is at rotostreetjournal.com, where we breed and feed you fantasy wolves. Mitch, you got a comment in here before I hung up, so why don't I do it? Because you're the best. See Robinson outdoing Carson, but I see where you're coming from. Just don't know how Heavy Meyer will also likes to run the ball. Yeah, he does. They're gonna be towards the top 5 in rush attempts. So yes, but if Carson stays healthy an entire season, of course. I really like this new offense, Mitch, that they're putting in under Shane Waldron. Same offense that led to Todd Gurley being an absolute monster, marrying the run and pass. Carson's raved about how he's split out wide. He's being used in screens more. That's the whole name of the game with this offense. Fast-paced, pretty run-heavy, but very creative in how they use their running backs as well. And that same report that talked about the offense said they have no interest in giving anyone else the ball. It's the Carson show. And we've seen it. When he plays, as long as he's healthy and he's on the field, he's going to get you top 10 weekly numbers. It is a matter of health, but everybody's at fucking injury risk, So I'm very excited. I think Carson could bring his game to another level that we haven't seen. But guys, thank you again so much. It always is awesome to see the repeat people here. It means the world. Keep your eyes out for that guide, for those projections, if you do want to help us get towards our next level, so we have some money to get to those stock profiles we always talk about. It would mean the world if you consider supporting us when they do come out. Hopefully it's before your draft, so it's actually useful as well. I'm going to be slaving away today, no doubt about it. But guys, have a great weekend. Best of luck in all your drafts. Big boards updated today, so fresh as possible rankings at roastedjournal.com if you're drafting this weekend, on the app as well. So check those out. You can find me at Twitter at RotoStreetWolf Podcast if you prefer that to live streams. Fantasy Fullback Dive, where we pave your path to 2021 titles, and we keep trying to grow that audience. So if you haven't already and you like the content, please consider subscribing, turning on that bell so we can always be live on your radar and answer your questions when you're here with us. Thank you guys again. Best of luck in your drafts this weekend and in a world full of fantasy sheep. Be that wolf. Later, guys.